Hey everybody, I'm Rebecca Jarvis. Happy Friday. Welcome to Real Biz, here coming to you live from ABC News. And we have a great guest today with us, Shervin Pishevar. He is co-founder of Shilpa Ventures and co-founder of Virgin Hyperloop One. I'm looking down at my paper because your company, Hyperloop One, you just got a name change because of the big investment from none other than Richard Branson this week, Hyperloop One.
Yes.
So this big investment from Richard Branson, you also are now changing the name to Virgin Hyperloop One.
That's right.
Tell people out there who haven't heard about Hyperloop One until now what it is. What's it all about?
Well, Hyperloop One is a revolutionary new transportation company that is pursuing the idea that Elon Musk originally proposed of doing transportation at airline speeds in a tube. And the way you accomplish that is you basically invent your own sky inside of a steel tube. You create a vacuum, a near vacuum, and you basically suck out the air of that vacuum. At the same time, you have levitation on the parallel tracks. So you have the pod actually levitating about an inch above. So you have a cushion of air. Then you have a propulsion system that we've invented over the last 3 years since Josh Geigel and I started the company. And the propulsion system we've invented from scratch, and we manufacture in Vegas. That is probably the biggest breakthrough that we've done. The engineers at Virgin Hyperloop One now are really some of the most brilliant minds in the world. And Josh Geigel is one of those, I say, he's got one of those Manhattan Project type of brains. He can actually, invent these things, create it, and build it with incredible people around the world that he's been able to recruit. So now, over this last summer, we reached some major milestones. We actually launched the first pod.
Where did you launch it?
In North Las Vegas, so in the deserts of Vegas. We bought the land, and thanks to the leadership of the governor and mayor of governor of Nevada and the mayor of North Las Vegas, we were able to accelerate the regulatory process. So we didn't have the usual obstacles to actually build this structure. And the structure is pretty epic. It's about 2 million pounds, and we built it in 11 months, which we'll get to in a second, is a signal that we're living in a pretty historical time. We're actually able to build these types of moonshot challenges in faster periods of time than any other time in human history. That should give a lot of hope to people who are watching. If they have dreams about building incredible things that might seem impossible in any other era, we're here to tell you that this is actually an era where if you are, have the tenacity and the commitment, you can band together with a bunch of people who also are believers and make ideas that seem like fantasies actually real. We're living in a time where private companies are doing what nations used to do. Elon is shooting rockets into the sky, right? He's trying to colonize Mars. These sound like, science fiction books like that we grew up with. Something like Asimov would have dreamed about 40, 50 years ago. Except now, it's not just dreams and science fiction, it's actually the reality of our lives, our physical lives. So those George Jetson dreams and cartoons that we grew up with, I'm going to take a little sip.
Welcome to the future. I want to let people out there who are listening to Shervin and I talk know that we're taking your questions, so you can post your questions below. I also have questions here from many of you who have already written to me on Twitter, and I'm sure there will be a lot of them because this whole thing, everything that you've described, it is sort of like a page straight out of sci-fi, but it is coming to life.
Yes.
You had your test mission. Is that, could you call it a test mission?
Well, we call it our Kitty Hawk moment.
Your Kitty Hawk moment.
Basically.
So your first flight, how'd the first flight go? How far did it actually go?
That's a great question. So what we did in May and July, we actually tested the entire system, full scale. So this, as I said, it's 2 million pounds. The tube that we've built on pylons in the desert with the fully integrated system It's about almost 12 feet wide, so it's pretty massive.
It's above ground.
It's above ground.
And I want to just clarify for people because Elon Musk, who you mentioned, was one of the first people to start talking about this. He has his boring company. They're underground, right?
Yeah, those
so
are tunnels.
so you guys are above ground. They're underground.
No. It's not. So the choice point.
Yes.
Is you can do above ground with Virgin Hyperloop One. You can also do underground for the tunneling. And you can also do on the ground. So, you basically use right-of-ways, existing right-of-ways to build this. And you can also basically tunnel and bore your way into it.
And how far did going back to the original, how far did it go?
So the structure, it's 500 meters long. What we did with the pod in the actual full test, we went to 192 miles per hour in 500 feet and stopped safely. So a bit of a stress test of seeing, in that kind of environment, could we make this happen and could we safely brake? The answer was yes. The key thing that's important for you and the audience to understand is that all of the system and everything that we built and the test that we showed actually proves that we will get to 700 miles per hour. The only limitation was the distance of the tube itself. Yeah. So if the tube went from 500 meters to 3 kilometers, okay, it would hit 700 miles per hour with the existing system and design that we did. That's why what we say is we're already there, okay? If you can hit 192 miles per hour in 500 feet, it means you're going to hit 700 miles per hour in 3 kilometers. The reason is there's no friction, it's a near vacuum, the propulsion is going to continue to speed it up, and in about 30 seconds, 40 seconds later, it's going to hit 700 miles per hour in that distance. Now, when you commercialize it, when we get to the next phase, which we're in now, we're in the commercialization phase, with a visionary like Richard Branson and an investment by Virgin Group, and having Richard join the board. That's going to help us in the commercialization process. We've graduated now from the R&D process and we've shown all of it works. So now we go to the phase of signing contracts with governments and actually building and breaking ground Hyperloop systems around the world by Virgin Hyperloop One.
How far away are we from that actuality of governments signing up for this and saying, we're cool with this, we're going to regulate it in some capacity, and we're going to allow you to take up the space to make this happen?
It's a great question. We're right there. I think, within the next year, we should be able to make announcements of our first contracts with governments around the world.
Not in the U.S.
So most likely we're going to be building the first Hyperloops in places like the Middle East, Asia, and potentially Europe. My dream, of course, would be to bring it to America. We'd love to build, New York to D.C. and do, 35 minutes travel, basically turning the cities into metro stops. It bends the idea of kind of where you live and where you work. Because if you can go city center to city center, and that's the reality is we don't need a lot of real estate to build Hyperloop stations. They can be in the middle of the city. And then you're going to be able to, transport people and things that fast.
So some of the questions. One question we got from Bong Bong.
Bong Bong. Hey, Bong
I don't know
Bong.
what your name is, Bong Bong, but that's your Twitter handle.
Oh, Bond.
B-O-N-G.
Oh, Bong Bong.
So Bong Bong asked, will Branson hold a controlling interest? What's his role in all of this?
Richard Branson and the Virgin Group have made a minority investment in Hyperloop One. Richard has joined the board of directors, and we've entered into a strategic partnership. At the same time, we've merged these two global brands of Hyperloop One and Virgin together, and we'll be rolling out that brand as Virgin Hyperloop One, and the name of the company will legally also change to reflect that. So that's that.
He seems like the kind of partner that would be very useful in this, and that he, in figuring out Virgin Airlines, worked with governments, is accustomed to dealing with some of the bureaucracy that would definitely be in the path of any kind of moonshot venture like this.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've looked up to Richard for a very long time. He's one of the great entrepreneurs in the world who's built a brand that is known worldwide. he inspires a lot of people as well. He's a good human being.
How many conversations did it take to sell him on the idea?
Well, we've known each other for some time, so he's a friend. I became a Virgin Galactic astronaut some years ago, early on, and so I wanted to go to space. It's been a childhood dream of mine. I used to, hide myself under our coffee table when I was growing up and act like I was in a spaceship for hours and hours, traveling around space. So that's why I signed up for Virgin Galactic, and I look forward to making that trip in the future. But
what comes first, your trip to Mars or someone taking the Hyperloop One, the Virgin Hyperloop One, from New York to Washington, D.C.?
Well, Virgin Galactic has been around for a long time. That kind of goal takes time. You have to have a long-term vision. I think they're near getting there. So I don't know what the exact dates are, but I would think that it's imminent in terms of even what Richard said yesterday when we announced it. Then in terms of Hyperloop, working around the world, Virgin Hyperloop One intends to kind of break ground and build these things, and you should be seeing them operational in the next 2 to 4 years.
2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
All right, we have a question from Kala, who wants to know the estimated price for one-way travel. Do you even have a sense for what pricing could be like?
Sure. Well, the key way to understand that, the answer to that question, is that we don't intend to really try to profit from passenger travel. Our business model from the beginning, when I started the company, I wanted to basically focus on cargo and logistics, because the movement of goods is actually a much more interesting business model in the world. If you can kind of shrink commerce, you can accelerate the economic growth of the world and create economic opportunity for many, many more people around the world. So this is very much kind of mission driven from that perspective, but it also has the ideas of a business model that I think is a beautiful business model. And what I mean by that, if you can move people and things this fast, if you can move things and cargo this fast, and by the way, green, cleanly, then you can actually take the ports around the world. And most of the major ports in the world are, because of the function and the existing technologies, are on the waterfronts of all the major cities of the world. Now, there's something about waterfront property, real estate, that's actually quite valuable. The waterfront properties of these cities around the world are extremely valuable, but they're forced to use it to be able to bring goods in. And guess what happens? LA Port, the value of the real estate of the LA Port is worth about $200 billion just by itself. It also brings in about 8,000 trucks, and these aren't small trucks. These are 8,000 18-wheelers that go on the highway systems of LA every single day. That's a waste. It causes pollution, it causes congestion, and it causes a lot of pain and loss of productivity. So if you can actually move the port and make it in the desert, the trucks move out of the way, you have a cleaner city, you have less congestion. You also unlock $200 billion of real estate to develop. And guess what? That subsidizes the other business model, which actually should make it very cheap for people to travel back and forth. And the reason is, if you're going to unlock all of those goods in that way, and you're going to move those goods in real time, you actually want people moving around, and you want to make that very cheap, because that's going to make the economic flows move around those cities and those regions much faster than ever before.
I can hear the argument, the way that you would lay this out to any regulatory authority, any government, in terms of making the case for A, why you should be on site, B, should there be subsidies, for example, for what you're trying to build out. I do think we have some questions coming in. Is that right, Taylor?
Sure.
Yes, we have some stuff coming in from Facebook. Okay. Gurish asks, how much is the system capable of withstanding natural calamities?
Good question. So Gurish, just for people out there in case they couldn't hear it, Gurish asked, how much can the system withstand natural calamities? If there's an earthquake or a hurricane, what happens?
Sure. Thanks, Gurish. That's a great question. Safety is extremely important for Virgin Hyperloop One, and it's actually quite paramount to how we think about things. If you look at kind of safety and airlines, from the airline perspective, you're in a tin can up in the air 30,000 feet. If anything goes wrong, you know what's going to happen, right? It's not a very safe environment at that point. So on the train side, if you have derailments due to any other cause, because it's in open air, when a train or a high-speed rail derails, what happens is that it moves all over the place. It crashes, and that's also not very safe. If you have an environment where you're controlling the whole environment, you're in a steel tube, and you have the system we've designed, we've been very mindful about that. It reduces the possibilities of any kind of derailment. We've also designed the pods, we've also designed the pylons so that they actually shift. We did that in terms of actually shifting for temperatures, so it expands and contracts, so the tube itself can slide around because of what we've actually invented. So I could show that to you if you ever come to Vegas.
How big is one pod? How many people could be seated in one pod? And do you believe that the people would also be traveling with the cargo?
That's a good question. You want it to be bidirectional, so you have tubes that go both ways, right? You could have intermixed pods where one pod has cargo and the other pod has people. So you will be able to mix those around. Because of the speeds that it goes, you want to also have enough buffer in between the pods. And all of it's automated so that it's extremely safe. If you need one pod to stop, it creates there's a safety kind of logic to how you actually regulate through the automation system all of those rules. Then on the cargo side and the people side, you want to be able to take different kinds of cargo, and you also want to have pods that might fit more people and less people depending on
just like
utilization.
Airplanes.
That's right. So the size of the pod does not need to be uniform. But, if we need a pod for 35 people or a pod for 65 people, we can make that work.
Because this is all inside of a steel container, and the steel container, the size of it won't change all of that much, does the technology to propel different shapes and sizes of pods, for example, or different sizes, rather, of pods, does the technology have to change and adjust given that? And what happens if, there are multiple different size pods all traveling within the steel container?
Sure. Well, some tubes are going to be wider than others depending on, function. So
the idea wouldn't be to necessarily have different size pods in one tube. It would just be different routes are going to be different size tubes.
Right. And so you got to think about it in kind of morphology, right? So if the function is going to determine what the actual design is going to be or the size of the actual tube, the pods, you're not going to have different width of pods. You'll have this uniform width.
See.
You can have longer pods or shorter pods. The other aspect of all of this is, creating people talk about self-driving, automation, etc. But the pods themselves should be able to go into a Hyperloop. And if you design different kinds of pods, you can actually have the pods continue and do the last mile as well. So once you get in between, let's say, New York, D.C., the pods can then leave and take you home or to the office. You can kind of create pooled situations where you have people commuting together, but all of these are electric, all of it's green.
I'm reminded of there's a boat in Chicago that starts out as a bus and then turns into a boat and takes people around the Chicago River.
That's
anyway,
cool. Like
Taylor.
the duck one.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
the
those
duck
are cute.
boats.
The duck boats. We might have some duck pods.
Okay, so we
Quack,
have.
quack.
We'll take two more questions from here on Facebook.
Okay.
Probably butchering this person's name. Mohanilla asks, "Do you have any schedule for market rollout?"
Schedule for market rollout.
Mohi.
Mohinulla.
All right, I won't attempt that. But thanks for the question. In terms of commercialization of Virgin Hyperloop One, The rollout is, once we sign the first contracts, we'd like to be able to break ground somewhere in the world in 2019 and then be operational by 2021, 2022. And those will be either cargo or passenger. It just depends on what the government that we're talking to, what they need for their nation.
And then here's our last Facebook question. I think this is a silly one. Matt says, will the Hyperloop really be powered by human screams?
That's funny. It's actually going to be.
Will the Hyperloop really be powered by human screams? Just want to make sure our audience heard that.
That's a great question. My daughter's favorite movie was Monsters, Inc. And if you remember, they went from, screams to laughter, right, and joy. Actually, Hyperloop will be powered by human joy. People are going to be extremely happy to be able to move around and save time in a way that changes the fabric, I think, the way people live their lives, not just in terms of jobs, but also personally. If you can go visit your parents, your grandparents, if the grandchildren can be around, people can come and visit each other. There's not just going to be joy in the experience of being transported there, but you'll have more moments of life with your loved ones to share. And that, I think, is probably the deepest impact that we can have.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me, Shervin.
This is wonderful.
Nice chatting with you. Thanks for all the great questions, guys, on both Facebook and Twitter. Remember, there's a new episode of No Limits that's up. You can check it out. It's with Bozoma St. John. She is the new...
She's great.
She works at a company you invested in, Uber. Recently joined Uber from Apple as their chief brand officer, and I really enjoyed our conversation. And I hope...
There we go.
We're right on time. Shervin literally set this before we started to make sure we stayed on time. So we're right on time. Hope you all have a great weekend. Happy Friday. Be well. Take care.
That's awesome.
Good work.
Perfect time.